Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Kempt Chesterfield speed.
So, ladies and gentlemen of the podcasting nerd world, we have a very incredibly special guest with us tonight. She is a true wording class hero, writer of dictionaries, counter of downs, and dictionary corner empress. Miss Susie Dent is here. Yay. Thank you so much for joining us, Susie.
That may go down as the longest piece of speech, Ryan, that you've ever made without me interrupting you.
It's
because I'm so nervous and excited and incredibly happy to be alive and speaking to you and Susie that I might be a bit overwhelmed and not actually say very much.
Likewise. My favourite, that was a fantastic introduction, thank you, and not particularly deserved, apart from the nerd bit, which was my favourite part, because I have been a nerd since I was tiny, and long before it became popular to be a nerd or a geek or a sport. And I think there are distinctions between the three of them, aren't there? But yeah. I am all of those.
That's fantastic. Well, you're home now, because that's
right.
That's what this is all about.
Welcome, join us.
If somehow someone who has been cut off from the broader word nerd world hasn't heard of Susie, she is a dictionary corner runner on Countdown at 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. She writes dictionaries and other books featuring and about words, and also has a new fantastic word etymology, linguistics, language podcast called Something Rhymes with Purple, which is fantastic. And anyone who listens to us and doesn't listen to that somehow, A, what are you doing with your life? And B, go listen to it, because it's awesome. So now that all that stuff is taken care of properly, Susie, you have some very cool stuff to share with us.
Tell us anything you want to tell us about any of the jobs that you do, and we will love it.
Well, I'll start off with the podcasting. You know, I love podcasts, because I came quite late to the podcasting world. It's the fact that anything can happen in your podcast and it's completely fine. So it doesn't have to be like a TV program, which is clean and you sort of do retakes if somebody, fluffs up. And it's not the same with podcasting. So I spilled an entire cup of tea over the recording equipment the other day on Something Rhymes with Purple, and I think we're going to keep it in. So it's fantastic. All my clumsiness remains intact, whereas it's usually edited out of Countdown, I have to say, thankfully. So I really like that about podcasts. And well, the thing that I would love to talk about today is something that is guaranteed to get a fist pump from the Countdown crew, who are as nerdy, I have to say, as I am. And Rachel also is a self-confessed nerd. Rachel Riley, who's in charge of the numbers on Countdown.
This is exactly how I've always imagined it to be. In my head, you have to have some good etymological, lexicographical chops to do anything on Countdown.
Yes,
you can't just get cameraman.
Including running the cameras, or that we have fantastic techie crew out in the corner. They all play along. That's the extraordinary thing. It's not actually about us on Countdown, genuinely. I'm not being modest or anything. It's all about the format, and that's what's kept it going for so long. So even on the comedy show, Cats Down, we call it for short, because it's a bit of a mouthful.
Yes, that's awesome.
The audience is laughing along, but they've all got a pen and paper, and they're all trying to come up with the longest word or crack the numbers. It's really interesting. Anyway, the thing that's guaranteed to get a silent cheer, if you like, particularly from the cameramen and women, is Rachel pointing to the numbers board and saying, yes, that was the sum of two crimes. That gets a little cheer. And then for me, if I use the term orphaned negative,
nice.
Orphaned negative, in lexicography, most of our terminology is ridiculously boring, isn't it? Corpora being one example. Even lexicography is not really a word that rolls off the tongue. But orphaned negatives I love, because these are the words that only really survive in their negative form. And I think your listeners will know what I mean when I talk about being unkempt or unruly, being unwieldy, impecunious, unmitigated, gormless, you name it. We only really dwell on the negative side of things, which I think is very sad. And I think it also maybe sheds a bit of light on the English-speaking psyche, that somehow we are such pessimists that we only think, well, maybe we're just gossips, and gossip tends to delight in the sort of, you know, the sort of slight mean take on people and our lives, I guess. Anyway, if you look in a historical dictionary, and I know you both are lovers of the OED because you mention it often, if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, you know, almost all of those negatives had at some point a positive counterpart, whether it's a sibling or, I guess, for the orphan negative, it has to be a parent of some kind. And they're still in the dictionary, and they've just been lost over time, and I would love to bring them back. So I've done a little list of just looking this morning at things that you can be, you know, that you can now be. Sorry, let me start that again. I have a list of the negatives which actually do have positive counterparts. So you can be defatigable.
Nice.
Something can be evitable if it's avoidable. You can be apt. You can be flappable. You can be committal. You can be consolate instead of disconsolate. You can be peccable, pecunious, wieldy, ruly. You can be made. I love this one. As well as being dismayed, you can be made.
Oh, that's perfect.
Which is wonderful. And of course, you can be full of gorm, because gorm was an old Viking word. It was a verb originally, meaning to take heed. And there's a wonderful little side note in the Oxford English Dictionary that says to be gorm-like, which is spelled G-A-U-M. Gorm-like is to have an intelligent look about you, which I think is wonderful.
That is amazing.
It's good,
brimming with gorm.
Exactly. And people always ask me, oh, can you be gormful? And the answer is yes. And you can be ruthful as well if you're full of compassion, because ruth is linked to rue, as in rue or regret the day.
Of course.
Yeah, so you can be full of ruth as well. So that was just my little take on, you know, on the sort of positive side of life that we seem to have forgotten, but I think we should re-embrace.
That's fantastic. I think my favorite of all of those, just because of the pleasing way it sounds and how much fun it is to say, and how it captures the sense of it so well, I think, is gruntled.
Yeah.
I love being gruntled. Because it just sounds like you're just grunting, you're just happy, you're just gruntled. That's awesome.
I know, that one's had a really interesting history, actually, because to gruntle originally back in the 1500s meant to utter a low grunt, and it was used of animals, so particularly pigs, and rarely used of people. So that one survived right up until, I think, sort of the 19th century. It's recorded in a glossary of words from Yorkshire, and then of people, it kind of gradually took the meaning of to grumble or murmur or complain. So that was actually the original gruntling.
Okay.
So in the sort of positive side of being gruntled, I think we have P.G. Wodehouse to thank for that, because I think he decided that it would actually be quite funny if you could be gruntled. And so in his wonderful Jeeves books, I think it was The Code of Woosters, there's a line saying he spoke with a certain what is it in his voice, and I could see that it's not actually disgruntled. He was far from being gruntled. So he in 1938, so he gives us the first sense of gruntled to mean pleased or contented. But yeah, gruntled is just brilliant. I wish we could be shevelled as well, but so far it's not in the dictionary because it's
shevelled
from the French. Yes, from the French, déchevelé, meaning your hair's all over the place.
I was not aware that one could be made. That's quite lovely.
That one's interesting.
Yeah, so may was in the dictionary as a verb, or is in the OED as a verb, and it could also mean to dismay. Of course, it did have that sense, but in its core sense, and it was inherited from Germanic, it meant to be strong, so to have power or influence. So if you were dismayed, you were kind of paralyzed, you were robbed of that power or influence, and so it then was sort of, I guess, transferred over to the emotion that accompanies that. So yeah, it was there. It was there as a verb. Well, obviously, it's always been there as a verb, as in I may. But in that sense, that's what it meant at the beginning.
That is
That's really interesting. I love that idea where it's like you hear people correcting people. It's like, can I do this? May you do this? Because the may implies not just the physical ability, but the autonomy and permission of someone else to do a thing. So that gets that power thing in there, which I had never thought about.
Yes, I have a friend who always says, please may you pass the salt, which always sounds a little bit strange to me. It's a kind of almost hyper politeness, isn't it? But it just sounds really sweet, and I really like it. Please may I have this, or please may you pass me the salt.
Yeah, the may you formation is not usual.
No,
not as common as the other way.
It is quite cute, and it's extremely good manners, even if linguistically it's kind of not, as you say, not standard. But I really like that.
Yeah.
We're big fans here of, we don't care if it makes sense, or even if it completely baffles people. We like the sound of that, so we're going to use it. And
me too. Yeah. And people don't expect that of linguists, do they? I mean, you would have covered this so many times, but people always expect the dictionary to be the authority. So particularly for Countdown, if I disallow a word because it's not in the dictionary, and it may not be in there because it's so obvious, it might be a compound that's so obvious it doesn't need to be in there. But people will say, but surely that's a word. And I will say, yes, it is a word. It's just not in the dictionary for frequency reasons or whatever, transparency reasons, whatever it is. But they will immediately assume that I am disallowing the existence of that word because it's not within the pages of my dictionary. And I think people find that quite hard, lacking an academy as we do. And of course, most linguists are very happy about that. But, for a lot of people, they are desperate for that kind of linguistic government, and they look to lexicographers and dictionary makers to provide that. And I think we always disappoint them when we say, actually, do you know what? I love that, even if it's not particularly standard.
I think
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say where I turned the corner on looking at dictionaries as the authority rather than, like as you say, as a sort of academy, putting high walls around what is a word and what is not a word, is back in the day when I read The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester.
That's such a great book.
And everything Winchester does is amazing so far that I've read, but it was just so interesting just to see, again, how the sausage is made with the OED in particular, and just like, the idea that this is a prescriptive document as opposed to a descriptive document just falls away when you learn how it's actually put together, and especially how it was originally put together.
Yeah.
And then it disavows you of that idea that you have to be beholden to the outer limits of a dictionary to decide what is a word and what's not a word.
Yeah, and I get even Samuel Johnson's got to realise that as well, didn't he? Because he set out to try and freeze the language and preserve its purity, and then just realised that enchaining syllables is futile as lashing the wind. So even he realised that. But I always get whenever I speak to people, and this is a whole different subject that you probably covered as well, but whenever I celebrate Americanisms, not just because they're usually not Americanisms anyway, but whenever I just sort of say, you know what, the one thing I love about American English, or one of the many things I love, is the strong verbs in the past tense. So, if my daughter will regularly say, I snuck into wherever, or I dove into the pool, and I love those because I think strong verbs are really so much more expressive, and gotten as well, which of course was in the Bible, and I think even Shakespeare used gotten. For me, that implies a kind of process. So he'd gotten angry, to me, is much clearer than he'd got angry, because the process is gone in that second one. But people get so uptight about that. But so very often, somebody makes up the past tense of a verb, I'll love it, and I always think texted, as in I texted him yesterday. Sounds all wrong, and I would much prefer it to be toxed, as in I toxed him.
My husband and I often use tuxed.
Oh, is he perfect? And
I you.
Listen to that's lovely. So, well, that sounds like it's got an umlaut on it as well. I love it.
It does a little bit. Yeah. My favourite slightly dodgy past tense, and when I was a teacher, and kids would write, and you don't want to be too prescriptive when it comes to writing, but at the same time you also are trying to teach children about grammar as well as various other things. And in this part of the world, the past tense of jump is in Scots we say jamp. And
Jamp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something that makes teachers either cringe or giggle.
Oh, I love that.
And you know, a lot of people will be so sort of mealy-mouthed. That's not a word. And I always took the line of, that's a beautiful Scots word you've used there. But in English, we say jumped. Because jump is, you know, I jump over the wall. And that's a perfectly normal, natural way to speak in this part of Scotland. So, that as soon as you started to talk about hard verbs, jump popped into my head.
I love it, because I think the Anglo-Saxons much preferred strong verbs to weak verbs, because I think it's almost quite lazy, isn't it, just to ed on the end of everything. And no wonder our kids get confused. My youngest always used to say, I bide some sweets, and you know, and you absolutely cannot blame people for getting it wrong.
For sure.
Yeah. But yeah, have you talked a lot about American English? I just absolutely love it, and I just don't understand why people get so irate about it. And also fling every accusation like verbing. They would kind of fling those at the supersized feet of America, and you know, we've been verbing for centuries. Shakespeare verbed, Keats verbed. We've all been verbing, but it's always the fault of North Americans. You must get this a lot. Are you Canadian, Ryan, or are you American?
I'm Canadian, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we sort of straddle that.
American English then?
Well, I can't say too much because we do straddle it. So we drop the second I in aluminum. We put the I that we drop from aluminum into tire.
No, we had aluminum as well, because we were following platinum, so that was the standard British term. And then we followed lithium, didn't we? I think, or we followed another mineral or element and decided to add the I in there. So we were all about aluminum, and we were all about sidewalks, and we were all about the fall for autumn until the pesky Normans came along.
Yeah,
it feels so snooty to me. It always seems to be that sense of, you know, given what we were saying about current affairs. I read a satirical article this week about how Britons have now officially lost the right to take part in that age-old, much-enjoyed sport of laughing at the Americans, sort of looking down our noses at Americans. And I think that, you know, people who get very, you know, up on their high horse about American English, it always feels a bit mean and a bit snobbish to me. And my favourite thing to point out, my husband is a maths teacher, and my favourite thing to point out is that Americans have been calling it math for longer than we've been calling it maths.
Yes, that's
hoping you bring that up.
That gets people down, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a real but I was trying to be smug. How what kind of, you know, and I love sort of to use another term that we often mangle, to cock a snook at people who have that sort of sense of superiority. Our words are the correct words, and your words are some sort of awful, you know. That's not how language works, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. And also, you know, Webster was desperate too, not just to kind of reject the king and then therefore reject the king's English, but he was also really desperate to make spelling easier for you know, for everyone over there. And you can't, I mean, to argue that center, CENTER, is somehow less correct than the French version that again we adopted after the Normans just makes no sense to me at all. I wouldn't argue for spelling reform over here, because I love the gnarliness of English spelling.
Yeah, me too.
Secret lives that are hidden, you know, within them. But it's such a nonsensical argument to me that, you know, that it's somehow some inferior infestation that's coming over from across the Atlantic. I just don't understand it.
As a Canadian who's stuck in the middle of these two things, so we call it Z, but I also call it a hood, not a bonnet. We put a U in color, but we don't have the I in aluminium. Like, just from the Canadian perspective, as we so often are crippled with our desire to and the ease of fitting in with Americanisms, but also our sort of pride in being more connected to the motherland than they are.
Yeah.
If you people could just agree, it would make things a lot easier for us. Like, I know that the academy is not something we want, but even just a few things. And then I could stop switching the R and the E around like it's still the 15th century in theater and center, because I do that all the time, because I never, or like with license, whether it's a C or an S, all these things, if we could all just sit down one day and agree, that would be super.
Can you imagine the war that would ensue?
Oh,
yeah.
There's no way that would lead to an agreement.
No, it's true.
But all of those as well were, because the spelling was totally chaotic before printing, and in Shakespeare's time, I mean, didn't he? I think he spelled his name differently twice on the same document, which was his will, and so. Spelling was totally chaotic when the Mayflower set sail. So, they took all sorts of versions of spellings with them. And I think honour without the U is found something like 500 times more in Shakespeare's First Folio than it is with the U. So, those spellings were alive and well over here as well.
Yeah.
And the one thing that is guaranteed to get me lots of snide remarks whenever I tweet using the word realise is the Z. And then people say, I can't believe you used the American spelling. And I was just saying, no, but it's the Oxford way. And I've worked for Oxford dictionaries, and it's closer to the Greek. My knowledge of Greek is not brilliant, but I think their IZO was basically the root form of a lot of our IZE or ISE verbs. And you could say that American English is actually etymologically more correct on that front, but people still hate it.
Yeah.
It's a mystery to me.
I don't know this for sure. Go ahead, Amy.
And we'll interrupt each other. Yeah. I do have to ask, because Ryan, you posted something about this recently, and it made me giggle quite a lot, because we're absolutely not restrictive, prescriptive. It has to be like this kind of people on this podcast. But at the same time, there has to be a common error that really gets up your nose.
Well, do you know what I used? It's a pronunciation one, and I really, really used to just cringe. That's putting it politely. I used to cringe whenever I heard people say mischievous. It's particularly over here, particularly younger kids and younger generations will say, mischievous rather than mischievous. But now I find it fascinating, because it's kind of like a snapshot of language change in action. So if ever, I've been doing a little kind of tour recently, and sometimes I will say to the audience, okay, how do you pronounce this adjective meaning full of mischief? And I give them the two versions. And some audiences, definitely in the sort of bigger cities like Leeds or Manchester, they will go for mischievous. And then in smaller places, and particularly smaller rural places, and again, places slightly older demographics, I guess, they will say mischievous. And so I find it really interesting how that's changing. And I always think, okay, I'm going to take a punt, and I think mischievous, because we're rhyming it with devious. I think that might well overtake the standard at some point, but I don't think the word will gain an extra I, because spelling and sound divorced centuries ago, so we haven't really worried about that until now, or before now. So yeah, I think that's how it's going to go, and it doesn't really bother me anymore. I've decided to be fascinated by it. I had a police officer actually come to me at the end of one of my shows and said, you know what, my colleagues are starting to talk about grievous bodily harm as well, in the same way as it's kind of, so yeah, that was my big bugbear, I have to say. What about any expressions? I'm a bit of a sort of language hippie. I don't really hate things. There's been a lot of talk recently about like as a filler, thanks to Love Island. Ryan, do you know about Love Island?
I know of it because I've heard people complain about it, but I haven't had the pleasure of watching it yet.
I just wanted to ask something, but before we move on from mischievous, is it possible to be chivous?
Oh, that is an amazing one. All right, I'm going to look that up, because it comes again. That's another word from the Normans. I've got the OED in front of me here, so because I don't know the answer. I
do imagine that you take the OED with you everywhere you go, because I would imagine that given your role on Countdown, everyone wants to know. So Susie, is it a word all the time?
Yes, I did. Well, basically, it's on my phone. It's on my iPhone. I've got a list. It's permanently bookmarked, because obviously I'm looking at OED online, and it definitely would be my desert island book. So yeah, it came over with the Normans. So late 20th century, the Anglo-Norman mischief. But actually, they take it back to myth, as in ill, wrong, or improperly, and then chief in the sense of end or extremity. That's an interesting one. So it's a kind of calamity, I guess, a misfortune of some kind. I don't know if you can be chivous, but I don't think the OED is having it.
But, I think it feels nicer to say chivious.
Chivious, it does, doesn't it? See, there
you go. Chivious does sound better.
There is a reason for this. Yeah, there is a reason for this. I'm looking up chivious now.
I very much like the phrase, and if we ever, I'd like to get your permission right now, if we ever have a T-shirt for this show, I would really like to have on the back of it, I've decided to be fascinated by it.
Absolutely.
As a phrase.
Yeah.
Because I love
there
that.
You go.
I'm also going to refer to myself as a language hippie from now on.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of a grammar Nazi, I presume.
It is, isn't it? It's totally, just some sort of hippie chick, language liberal. I remember doing something with John Humphreys, who, Ryan, if you don't know him, is a big, he's quite a big sort of figure in journalism, works for the BBC, works for a programme on Radio 4 called the Today programme, which is a political programme in the mornings, and a current affairs programme, really. Anyway, he is definitely quite pedantic when it comes to language. And, for him, rules are rules, and there was a golden age that we need to return to. And I did a programme with him, and he did teasingly call me, I think he actually called me a hippie chick language liberal or something.
Awesome.
So I'm going with that. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that, I have to say. But yeah, we were talking about Love Island, and there was a lot of talk in the British media about how like as a filler was just everywhere. And I think they did a count, and I can't actually remember the stats, but it was something ridiculous, like it was used 40 times in 3 minutes in an interview with one of the inhabitants of Love Island. And one school in Britain decided to send it to the word jail, this like as a filler, because they thought it was just awful and it was somehow infiltrating. This is a primary school watching Love Island.
Definitely not language hippies.
Not the schools, no. I know word jail. I really, really didn't like the idea of that. But I decided, and this ties back to the OED, I decided to look up the first use of like as a filler that was in the OED, and it goes back to something like 1778.
Oh, that's amazing.
Nice.
So, we've been doing everything for centuries. Everything we complain about has been there for a very long time.
I did notice I was being a geek and doing some homework before speaking to you today, and I was having a look at your publications. I have to mention this. When Ryan said we were going to speak to you, after I'd stopped screaming, I immediately began mentally composing a list of things that there was no possible way I could or should ask you about. And because I don't want to be super embarrassed on a podcast. But well, actually, Ryan, I don't know.
For.
Yeah, has that ever come up before? Don't ever.
No.
But one of the things that I have to say, and it's that whole, when someone pranks you repeatedly, and you try really hard not to mind, but actually you think you want to poke that person in the eye. I'm a huge fan of Cats Down. Sometimes I like to say that I prefer it more than the original, but that's
a lot of people do. I know lots of people do. I think.
Yes, it's a really difficult decision to make. No, that's okay. But without fail, every single time, even though I know it's a joke, even though I know that you don't mind, even though I know all of that stuff intellectually, I get an absolute fury when Jimmy Carr refers to your books as boring.
Yes, I get a lot of that. And the answer I always give is that I do prefer it that way, because he was so respectful at the beginning towards me and Rachel, and we both felt a little bit odd. So now he's as rude to us as the rest of them. For some reason, he's decided to take a two-pronged attack on me, which is either that I'm incredibly boring or that I'm some kind of sex pervert. And it's a very odd combination.
I've noticed that as well, yeah.
Yes. So his I think the kind of standard Jimmy Carr joke when he introduces me is, if you were standing looking at a row of Susie Dent books stacked up end to end, you're standing in a charity shop. That's just, that will give you a flavour of Jimmy Carr's introduction to me. But well, thank you for, the audience often go, oh, in sympathy. I always try and find a good comeback, but it's always too late. It's that classic staircase wit thing. But
yeah.
I do think it kind of feeds into that whole being a geek before it was a cool thing to be. You know,
Yes.
When people would why are you reading? Oh my God, you're such a geek, kind of thing. And
Yes.
you know, we're very much about this podcast. I think it's about 3% etymology and 97% enthusiasm. I think those numbers are probably pretty good. But because we just love looking at words, and we're very much into encouraging people to be enthusiastic about things that are maybe not terribly cool, or you know, other people might sort of switch off when you start to talk about them. But yeah,
no, so I find it fascinating, and I'm definitely going to use some of yours on Countdown, if I may. And obviously, I will credit you, because I think you were talking about busking the other day, and that's always been a bit of a kind of mystery for me, because it's had so many different stories behind it, which I think Ryan was going through. One. Yeah, it's really odd. I mean, and it's just meant kind of lots and lots of different things. So how it kind of ended up as it did today is just a real, yeah. I guess it's, yeah. Anyway, let's not get back into that, because I know you've covered it before, but I did find that one really fascinating, particularly fascinating for me.
You've just made Ryan's lifetime.
You have, for sure.
I need to find another word for fascinate, basically, because I say that quite often. I say fascinating or wonderful on Countdown, apparently, and that's another of the complaints I sometimes get. So I'm going to look up the historical thesaurus. Do you use that in the Oxford English Dictionary? Talking about getting really nerdy, there's a historical thesaurus that's now loaded in there. So I've just looked up.
It really is one of these resources that I feel like I could spend weeks with it and never really uncover all of the fantastic parts of it. You know, it's brilliant. Well, just look up, if you basically go to the OED and then look up thesaurus to the right of it, the right of the entry. It will give you all the synonyms for that particular word or concept throughout English, and it will start with Old English usually, and then take you right up. So yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. It's just the most wonderful thing, and hopefully they're going to add quite a lot of new slang terms as well eventually. So
that's amazing.
Slang thesaurus in there, and then we've got Jonathan Green's wonderful slang dictionary as well that we can look at. So it's endless. It's endless, and we're never ever going to get to the end of it, which is, well, obviously those two mean the same thing, but you're saying we're never ever going to get to the bottom, which is great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now I know you have very important obligations on the other end. Do you have a couple more minutes? We'll throw our words at you and see what you think of them, and then we'll go from there, or do you have to run?
Definitely. No, that's absolutely fine. Please, could you edit out may is actually a verb. It's obviously a verb. I can't believe I was getting excited about that.
Now hang on. If podcasts are going to be free and easy and full of fluff, I don't know if that's a...
Until I do that. That's really true. I think that was just something I cannot believe I just said that.
Do you know the imposter syndrome thing, right? Like Neil Gaiman's story about imposter syndrome, meeting Neil Armstrong at an event and having him go, I don't think I'm cool enough and important enough to be here. The fact that in a podcast, Susie Dent said that and now feels this way about it. Do you know the millions of lives, if we ever reach millions of people, which is a high, lofty goal, who would be made better by knowing that happens to you as well?
Okay.
I really didn't think you would be the first person to say, I can't believe I said that.
not on this episode.
Can you imagine the pressure on people just assuming that you're going to be incredibly articulate, and people always say, oh gosh, I'm so worried about sending you that text message, and I didn't know whether that needed a semicolon or whatever. It's, for heaven's sake, I just, I am as fallible as anybody else when it comes to language.
I've gone through life lowering everyone else's expectations religiously, and so I feel like I've avoided that, but probably in the wrong way.
You're making me think of we recorded an episode last year with the wonderful Mignon Fogarty, Grammar Girl.
Yeah.
And we met up. We saw her at Harvard, and we were on a panel with her, which was totally fantastic. And I went to see her speaking the day after the panel, and she started off with a gigantic, sort of 3 foot long inflatable red pen. And
wonderful.
the opening to her speech was that people assume when you're called Grammar Girl that you have one of these about you at all times.
Yes. But also that I thought you were going to say right at the beginning of her talk, she made the most incredible grammatical gaffe, which would have been me.
Perfect.
Anyway, I probably have until I've probably got 4 or 5 minutes. Is that going to be enough for you?
Perfect.
Boom.
Absolutely.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll go through this.
Lovely.
So I was looking
Okay.
around for words, and feeling that kind of sense of ominous doom that I no longer need to feel because you're lovely. But I was looking for Canadian words because I was thinking maybe that would be something that would maybe not be on your radar. But I know you do like a dialect word here and there. And what I came up with was Chesterfield, which it basically just here, particularly about 2 decades ago and beyond that, it's a bit of an older demographic word, just means couch or sofa.
Oh.
Yes.
But it's a specifically Canadian thing. Like I don't think anywhere else uses Chesterfield to mean just generally sofa or couch. And so I was wondering if you had encountered that use of it. Do you have that over there? Do you know of that?
No, I've heard of a Chesterfield coat, and I have heard of. I didn't know Chesterfield was a sofa. I knew it's kind of chair, I thought. But it's interesting you should say that it's in general use throughout Canada, because another thing that I've heard, and I don't know if it's still true, is that Frigidaire also was a kind of generic name for a fridge for a while. Is that not anymore?
I'm very familiar with the brand. We basically just called it a fridge, although I could see that being, I can't remember what the name of those words are, where a brand takes over and becomes
a generonym.
Yeah, I could see that being that.
Yeah,
like
Chesterfield,
Hoover or Jacuzzi.
Yeah, or Kleenex.
Hoover's, that stuff. I mentioned fridge quite a lot because one of the questions I'm asked very often is why is there a D in fridge? And I think it's obviously the pronunciation as well, because frig would sound odd. But also
and Jimmy Carr would definitely make jokes about it.
He'd love that. He would love that. One of the things we think as well is that Frigidaire, the brand, was just so just reigned supreme in the fridge world for quite a long time, in maybe the 30s and 40s. So that because of Frigidaire, it kind of influenced the insertion of a D in the fridge. So that's how I knew about Frigidaire. But Chesterfield, I like that.
So apparently it comes from the Earl of Chesterfield, which is an obsolete title in the 18th century.
Okay.
And the OED says that Philip Stanhope was a writer on manners and etiquette. I haven't found any direct link. Someone else posited that it's probably just more clever marketing, like trying to associate with the high class and nobility. But then I looked up Chesterfield as a name of a place, and it basically is just, I guess the Chester comes from an Old English and before that Latin castrum, so meaning fortified place.
Fortified place, yes.
Which is where castle comes from. But interestingly enough, Fedem Online links it to says that it might come from castrare, so to cut, as in being cut off from surrounding, which would make
sense.
Lancaster, Chesterfield, Chester, and castle all cognates with castrate, chastity, and incest, which I found really interesting as far as a weird family tree going on.
Very much so.
Yeah. I love curious siblings in that language. That's just a whole subject unto itself. I just also remember Chesterfield's cigarettes or cigars in the US.
Yeah, in Virginia, they came from Chesterfield cigarettes.
Oh, there you go. So they can
world
mean
of
lots of different things
Chesterfields.
depending on where you are. Yeah, very productive.
And then the coat thing as well, yeah. So there's Chesterfield answer.
I didn't know
Amy,
that.
what have you got?
Okay, fittingly, the word that I'm going to talk about is speed.
Speed?
What have you got, Dent?
Speed?
Speed, yes.
Yes, okay. What have I got? What, in terms of... Okay.
Putting you on the spot.
I think all I know is that it used to mean to prosper, didn't it? So Godspeed meant may God keep you well. So wasn't it all about kind of being successful in some way? And then because
exactly
people are more successful. Is that it?
Yeah. So there are four senses, four definitions given by the OED, which are all sadly obsolete, apart from in Scotland for one of them. Before you get to the sense of speed being the way that we use the word nowadays.
Yeah. So the fastest is the most successful. I guess that's that's the idea, isn't it?
Oh, I love that.
Do you think that's right? I'm not sure. I think I would take issue with that.
I actually found, which I found quite interesting, that when speed first became used, when it first became used to describe a rate of progress, it actually just meant rate of progress, neither slow nor fast. Just that things were proceeding, which I found was quite an interesting way to go, because I assumed that, you know, when I discovered that it was related to success, I thought, oh, okay, so the sense that the fastest is the best is perhaps.
But it wasn't that.
But not originally, not initially, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's something I've definitely learned today. When it comes to greetings like Godspeed, I guess you would say, as a farewell thing, it just always reminds me of, I love all the etymologies of greetings and goodbye. So like ciao means or meant I am your slave. So it was from the Italian dialect schiavo, I am your slave.
Oh, wow.
Which is great. And that also goodbye, lots of people don't know, is God be with you. So that was a kind of religious blessing. And also, you won't know this, Ryan, probably, because unless they have this in Canada, I don't think they do. It's a greeting from, I guess, the 80s and 90s. You might find people saying watcher. So do you remember watcher? And it just sounds really very kind of colloquial and very slangy. But actually, it goes back to another greeting, which was what cheer, which was, I think, maybe 18th century.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Cheer used to mean your face. So what cheer was kind of, you know, what's your countenance? What mood are you in? And that's how we think watcher came along, which I
You've solved the Harry Potter riddle for me, because Tonks in Harry Potter keep saying watcher Harry, and I was always like, I just skipped over it because I don't know what that means.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just very strange. I find that lovely. So all these things are kind of rooted in centuries past. Anyway, have I been nerdy enough for you today?
Oh, amazing!
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I know we've taken up a lot more than we meant to, but
it's really nice. And I'm very happy for you to leave in all of my inarticulate comments, if only to convince people that I am so fallible and that they don't need to worry about sending me emails or text.
There we go. That's
we
perfect.
leave in our inarticulate comments, so it seems only fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's 90% of what we do. So yeah, listen, thank you so much for coming by and chatting with us. I mean, it was amazing, and you've been very generous with your time and gracious. So yeah, thank you very much for everything.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, honestly, it made my day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.